Hello. Let's see. I think. Well, hopefully this is a good angle. It's part 5. It's hard for me to make these videos in a way because I know how hidden I am on YouTube. In fact, I can't find myself on YouTube. If I go to search, it's extremely hard to find me, and unless you have a subscription. So if you want to be able to find me more easily, you need to subscribe. I think that makes it easier to find me. And I don't know if you'll get notifications or not. I never do. Anyway, this is the only social media I'm on, and people say it, and I know they mean it, and I mean it too. Even if this just helps only one person, I'm gonna do this. And it looks like at least one person is watching this, and sometimes more. And I know a lot of it must seem too long, and so I'm still trying very hard not to take too long. But let me continue now in part 5. When I left off the end of part 4, I was revisiting when I was in College Station, which was almost 3 years. It wasn't a full 3 years, but it was close to 3 years. And that was a really big deal for me because I'd lived there so long. And a couple other things I left out was my brother, my stepmother and my brother. They didn't meet until we moved there because I had been sent back to California when I was 11 to live with my dad, but he apparently couldn't handle the child care, and there was an aunt that wanted to take him in Lufkin, Texas. And so when we came back to College Station and Dad having his new wife, that's when we went and got my little brother. And of course, my stepmother, who I call Mom, it's always my stepmother. It's never ever my biological mother. When I say Mom, I wasn't allowed to call her that. Okay, so I hope that helps you, because everybody I know always gets confused about which mother I'm talking about. If it's my biological mother, I always use the word biological before I say mother. Hopefully that helps too. Okay, so that was a really sad thing. I was the only one that knew about it. I was the only one my stepmother told, at least for a long. She might have had some other confidant that I didn't know about, but I was the only one that I knew she told. Was that when she first met my little brother, who was about almost 6, he was 5, probably 5 and almost 6 when she met him. There's something about him that reminded her of her ex-husband, who had beat her for 10 years, to the point where when she came home one day and her best friend was in bed with him, she decided to believe in divorce. So that had been her past. She had had a very, very suffering life. She'd been brought up by an alcoholic single mother, and in living in Utah in a Mormon family. But she called herself a Jack Mormon. She drank a lot of coffee and smoked a lot of cigarettes, and that's all I really knew about Mormonism. Was very little from her, and I kind of think she didn't know a lot about it either. Anyhow, that was really bad news, that my little brother reminded her of the one person who had abused her most in her life. He had even forced an abortion on her using Drano. It's awful. Anyway, um, so it was, most people didn't know this, but it was very hard for my mother. My stepmother, mom, it was very hard for her to love my little brother the way she wanted to. And she really tried, but I know she had a lot of trouble with it. And basically, what happened over the years, from the little bit that she would tell me about, it seemed like every time there was a big problem between him and her, that's when she would go back to remembering how much he reminded her of her ex-husband, and that just made it a lot worse. And I really don't think, pretty sure he didn't know. I might have told him, you know, up when he was already in his late 40s or mid 40s. I might have told him. But until then, he didn't know. And all he knew was he was getting some feelings from her he didn't like. And what else did I want to be sure and fill in? Oh, there's a girl that had lived, that had moved in, and I didn't get to know her very well. And then I remember my mom saying, after she had first tried to push me to go be friends with her, and then it didn't really take, I think mostly because she was, at the time she was called Doris, and at the time she was 1 year ahead of me in school. And if you were in the same grade, it was funny how it just didn't seem to be easy to get close to anybody that wasn't in your own grade, which I think is very odd and very, that's one thing I don't like about our school system. It's very unnatural to know only people exactly how old you are, or exactly within 2 years of your age or whatever. But anyway, later, before we left, my stepmother had told me that she heard from other people that Doris had been sleeping with boys in sleeping bags in the yard, in her yard where she lived. And back then, people called that being a slut. And my mother was horrified. My stepmother was horrified that she had tried to push me into being good friends with her. And funnily enough, she is the one that I stayed in her basement later when I came back to visit College Station and started getting turned on to drugs. But anyway, at that point in my life, I was extremely innocent sexually, and I was very protective of myself about it, because I had met men sometimes with my father having a friend over, and he would leer at me, or a friend I had that we experienced that with one of the friends of her mother, and we were so terrified of him. He came over once when she wasn't home, and he kept banging on the door, and we both went into a walk-in closet in the dark and sat there and waited like for an hour before he finally went away. We were so terrified. That's about as much. I just didn't know much and didn't have much curiosity about sex. I love that about my childhood, was that it was not an oversexed childhood. Not really. And I mean, I saw what people were around me were doing, and I saw my dad having girlfriends over and spending the night, and him spending the night at their house and all of that, but I didn't think about sex. I just didn't, and that was a wonderful freedom. I'm so glad I had that freedom, at least until my teens. And when I was in College Station, I did get a big crush on this boy at school, and he wasn't good looking. I mean, he wasn't ugly, but he wasn't somebody that I would ever be attracted to just because by looking at him. It was not a sexual thing, but it was, the teacher teased him a lot and he would turn beet purple. And I was so enamored of him because he would blush and he had such a strong blush. And so, but I was also extremely, I didn't want anybody to know I had a crush on him, not even my best friend. I couldn't tell her. She would tell me who she liked, and I wanted to be able to reciprocate, but I was so scared. I don't know exactly. I just was really, really, really scared. Oh, this reminds me why. Because when I was in second grade, I had a big crush on a guy. His name was Stephen. And there were two girls. This was when we lived, it was at one of the schools we kept returning to. When we'd move away, would move back, would move away, would move back. I think I left and came back 3 or 4 times during elementary school. Anyway, this was, I think, the second time we had come there, and I was in second grade, and there were two girls in the class that always had really pretty dresses with big, thick petticoats, and they both had long, beautiful, one of them had extremely beautiful hair, and the other one had long hair, but, and she was a little bit plainer, but she had a long ponytail, and, but they both had these incredible dresses full of petticoats, very different from anything I ever had, and they looked so feminine and cute, and Steve liked them, obviously, and I had been chased by a boy in first grade, but I didn't see it as a compliment in any way. In first grade at one of the schools I went to, every day when I'd come out of the cafeteria, he would suddenly appear and start chasing me. And I was terrified of him. And I always ran until I would somehow get away and behind something where he couldn't see where I was, and he never ever caught me. But finally one day, I don't know exactly how it made it stop happening, but it stopped happening. That was also where I had my very first boyfriend, David, in second grade. And I don't know how he ended up being my boyfriend, but I just liked him and he liked me. And he would kiss me. And that was fine with me because I knew that boyfriends and girlfriends kissed each other. But still, for me, this was not a sexual thing. And then he started wanting to show his friends that he would kiss me. So he'd call his friends over and they would watch him kiss me. It would just be like, a quick peck on the lips. And then we ended up getting called in to speak to the teacher. We hear you've been kissing on the playground and this will not be tolerated. It's not okay. And so we had to stop doing that. And then one day I went to go play at his house, and a ladder, I think because of me, maybe I was running and I tripped against a ladder, something like that happened, and the ladder fell, and it fell on his cat. And I didn't do that on purpose, and I didn't try to hurt his cat, but he blamed me, and he never spoke to me again. So that was my very first boyfriend in first grade. And then, okay, I don't think I had any more boyfriends after that for a while. But I really liked this guy, Steve. Stephen Hawk was his name. And he would always chase these two girls, Lisa and Nancy, that had the pretty dresses. He'd always chase them on the playground, and I thought, well, I know about how doing that because I'd been chased before. And, oh, this is so humiliating. I would just go start running with the girls, pretending he was crazy, as if he was chasing me too. Somehow I thought that was all I needed to do for him to start liking me. But that didn't happen. He didn't give any indication of liking me. And so I asked my parents, this was just before they separated the final time. Well, it might have been the final time. And we were eating at the table, and I said, there's a boy I like at school, and I don't know what to do about it. And my mother said, don't do anything. Wait until he lets you know that he likes you. And my father said, oh, let him know that you like him. You could write him a note. And I followed my father's advice. Ooh, what a mistake that was. I collected all my leftover Halloween candy in a hat box, and I put a little note in it. I was going to write in it, I love you, but I didn't know how to spell love. I was trying to find I Love Lucy in the TV guide so I could spell it right, but I couldn't find it. So instead I wrote on the note, I like you. That's all I put, was I like you, in with the candy. And then I took it to school one day with me in a grocery bag. And, you know, whenever you put something like that in your locker, everybody wonders, what she got in the bag? And I wouldn't tell anybody. And then at the end of the day, everybody left. And for some reason, he was leaving really late. And I was just kind of out there in a courtyard waiting for him to come out so I could give him the candy. And I had it out of the bag now, just the hat box. And he came to walk by, and I just stuck out my hand. I said, here. And he stood back as if I was offering him a bomb. And I said, it's for you. It's okay. It's candy. And he didn't. He just ran away. And then he had an older brother, I think, who was in 4th or 5th grade, what we called the big kids. And in California, in that town I lived in, which was South Pasadena, they had these tunnels that went under the highways, or under the busy streets. And then that way you could walk in the tunnel. There'd be stairs down, like cement stairs, and you walk. They had a few lights in there so you could see. And then you'd walk up the stairs the other side, and you'd be on the other side of the street. But bums hung out there a lot. I mean, or winos or whatever. There was always some wine bottles laying around when you went in there. And I fortunately never had it. This is the worst thing that ever happened to me, going through one of those tunnels. And I think after this happened, I started avoiding going in those tunnels. What happened was I had just come down the stairs, and I didn't know that Steve and his big brother were walking ahead of me in the same tunnel. I didn't even know that. But I get down to the bottom of the stairs, and my eyes were good enough then, I could make out who they were. I knew it was Steve and his brother. And Steve said something to his brother, and his brother picked up a wine bottle and threw it at me, and it literally, he was good at throwing, and the wine bottle broke right at my feet. So that was my first, it was the second time I'd gotten rejected by boys, but it was a little more intense that time than the cat. And so I guess it was after that I just was really scared for a boy to know I liked him. So when I was living in College Station and had this crush on Jerry, it was, I couldn't tell Dixie. I just couldn't tell anybody. Nobody. In fact, I never told anybody for many, 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 many years. anyway, um, that's how innocent I was as far as, like I'd be about to go to a party or something. My stepmother would say, "Now don't you be going off with any boys." And I'd just say, "Oh, Mom, you don't need to tell me that," because I was I was really far from that. Um, but then just before we left, I met a boy that I met him really briefly once or twice. He was a few years older than me, and I happened to live in just behind our alley. It was a grass alley. It wasn't like a paved alley, but there was a grass alley behind our house, and behind that, and then his house. But we had a pretty big backyard, so it wasn't like that. It was real close to us, and he lived in that house right behind us. And his parents were friends of my parents, and which I didn't ever know, but um, until we were leaving, and his parents invited our family to the country club for a goodbye breakfast. And so our whole family went, and their whole family, which was just two boys, the one that I was just mentioning, Frank, and his slightly younger brother Jim. But Frank was the one that I thought was really cool. I thought he was really good looking and everything. And so we were at the country club having breakfast, and Frank was talking to me, and I wasn't used to boys talking to me. It was pretty nice. And then at one point he said, "Hey, why don't we get away from these old fogies and go talk by the pool," or something like that. And then we talked some more. I might be remembering that part. I don't know if we really went by the pool for a while. That part is not as clear in my mind. But then he said, "Oh, you want me to give you a ride home?" And I was like, "Sure," And so we went back in to tell our families that he was going to drive me home. And we were just talking and talking. He was very easy to conversate with. That's a new word that I like. I never heard that word conversate until quite recently in life. But anyway, we were conversating, and he drove me home, and he walked me to the door. We were about to leave in just 2 or 3 days, I think. And he said, "Well, I guess I'll never see you again. Goodbye." And I remember thinking in my head, "Oh, yes, you will." I didn't even know where that came from, but that's what I thought. And I really had a crush on him by that point. I thought he was so cool. And so anyway, he's the one that I ran into later that I mentioned before when I came back to College Station during a vacation. And he was painting a house, and we were talking, and he invited me to the group of people that were all smoking marijuana and also had their own band. So anyhow, part of the reason I wanted to bring that all up is because I had a real fear of relationships with boys, or even admitting that I would like a boy. I'm not sure exactly why, but I was really scared for any boy to know that I would like him. And that was one of the reasons when I was in a play at Arapahoe High School in Littleton. One of my scenes, I played Mary in an old, well-known play called Life with Father. And there was a point I had to face the whole audience and cry because the boy that I had just sat on his lap had stiffly jumped up for me to get off. It was because he was wearing his father's pants, and he was scared for his father's pants to get wrinkled, but I didn't know that, and I was taking it personally. And that cut too close to home of how I felt about boys. So that was why it was such a difficult play for me to be in, because I was having to face one of my biggest fears, and I don't think that I really faced it, but I cried almost every night during those rehearsals. And like I said, I was a little bit less shy after that. And a couple of the people I met, I'd gotten to the point where, I mean, Dixie was pretty popular, who I'd known before, but she was popular in a different sense. She wasn't like the in crowd popular, but she was the kind of popular person because she was so nice to everybody. Oh, I love her. She was so sweet and still is. And she was friends to everyone, and it didn't matter what their race was, and she would learn their names, and she would talk to them when we would be walking to school or walking back, and she was just really something. What a healing person to have in my life for those few years I was there. Anyway, and there I was trying to talk her into believing in reincarnation. I don't think she ever believed me. I don't think hardly. I always got the impression nobody ever believed me, but I found out later that some people believed a little bit of what I said, and I feel really bad for that, because I don't know why. I thought it was a great thing to learn about it, since it had made me feel better. It made me think I knew what was going on, and I'd been so unhappy not knowing what was going on, and so I feel really bad that I continued that for at least a couple years of trying to push my beliefs on my friends. Oh, reincarnation, that's the thing. And anyway, after leaving there was no Dixie. Nobody even vaguely like her. Well, there was somebody very vaguely like her, actually. Jocelyn. She was wonderful. She was a Christian girl. And she was the one that I tried real hard to get her interested in reincarnation. And she had me spend the night at her house a couple times. And I remember it was so funny because she had a father that was always listening to Christian radio. And I remember when you'd walk in the door at her house, the first thing you would see was him sitting at the table. The kitchen was kind of behind him, but the first thing was the little table he was sitting at with the radio on, and it would always be preaching. He was always listening to preaching. And he reminded me of that guy that played, or was, whatever, Henry Gibson on the Laugh-In. I don't know if anybody knows who that is, but he was just like this little guy. And anyway, he was always sitting there listening to preaching, and I thought he was nuts. I thought he was crazy. I mean, what a crazy thing to do, to sit and I find it very ironic now, because I'm sure that anybody that has anything like the mindset that I had back then, I'm sure they all think I'm crazy, because sitting there listening to preaching for hours is something that is lovely to me now, and I've done an awful lot of it, especially not having the ability to get out and meet people much in person because of my age and the disability of my housemate. I need to stay home most of the time, and I don't have she has a car that I drive for going to the grocery store, but it's an old car, and we don't want to drive it too much. And well, anyway, and I never found a church that I could feel good about in Austin, Texas. I came close every time I go to a church, I always love it at first, and then I find out what's going on, and there's always something that is just, I cannot support this place. Anyway, I've been very grateful for the internet. I have very love-hate feelings toward technology, because it does allow me to listen to sermons and people's testimonies. I love listening to people's testimonies. They've gotten really strong lately. People are not afraid to talk about their experiences anymore. People used to be very, People still are, to some extent, very afraid to admit that they've experienced anything supernatural with Jesus or even the devil. You know, they don't want to talk about it because they're so afraid everybody will think they're crazy. And I think there's a lot of reason for that. From my understanding, in back history in the United States that people don't hear about much, if at all, is that they used to, anybody that was considered to be a fanatic Christian, that would get them put in a mental institution for life. And that was a persecution happening in the United States. I think people didn't even, I don't know. I never knew about it. And then also from a friend of mine that was in a, or maybe she doesn't think she's my friend anymore. That's a whole thing. But anyway, I love her still. She was born into a bloodline family where they start doing really terrible things to their kids at a young age to program them to basically become Satanists and become servants of very evil things. But she found Jesus at a young age, and it's been very, very rough for her. But one of the things that they did to make her be obedient was to threaten to put her in a mental hospital, because she knew that the mental hospitals they were talking about also were not nice places. It's where you might get experimented on, and probably would be experimented on, and who knows what else. And so that was the threat she lived under most of her life, and I think she still feels some of that today, the threat of people thinking she's crazy. And that's really sad, but that's what's been happening in the United States, is that people have a fear that others are going to think they're crazy if they say anything that's happened to them that sounds supernatural, from sleep paralysis, which, science tries to explain, and it does not explain it well, because in sleep paralysis, which I experienced quite a few times when I was 18, I always, and I hear many people experience a very dark entity being in the room, and then it pressing really hard down on your chest, and it feels really evil. It's just the most common thing that you hear from people that are willing to talk about their sleep paralysis, is how evil this entity feels. And very few people can make him out as a particular demon or whatever, but some people actually see images of demonic images when that happens. And I have no idea why the sleep paralysis stopped for me when I was 18, because it was happening a lot over a period of months. And I did not turn to God. I never turned to God for anything, because I don't know if I even knew you could really do that or what, but I did do some good things, like not selling or giving away those drugs, the speed, which was nowadays would be called methamphetamine. Instead of giving it away or selling it, I flushed it down the toilet. That was a good thing, not for the sewer, but in the sense that I was realizing that I should not pass poison on to other people, and I was being conscientious about that. That's the only thing I can think about, is that maybe I did some things that made the Holy Spirit decide, okay, we're going to let her off the hook on the sleep paralysis for a while. I have no idea, because I don't remember doing or saying or thinking anything that made it stop. But it did stop. And I think that might be also because what I really do believe is my calling was for me to experience just a little bit of a lot of things, so that I could share about it in the ending years of my life. Even though I only quote-unquote dabbled in most of these things, I dabbled far enough to see they were evil. And I've heard many testimonies of people that went beyond dabbling, and oh, it's just horrific where people end up, and it's, I feel very, very blessed and fortunate that I didn't go to some of the links that I could have, although as sins happen, I might have mentioned this before, the more you sin and you're not repenting, and I wasn't repenting, I didn't even know what that word meant, and then it hardens your heart a little bit more and a little bit more, so that when it's handy to not feel compassion for somebody, then you don't. Things like that. Or, well, basically what you do is it's the evil one. It's like there's legalities. The whole court system is all based on God's word, really. And there's things that if you sin, and there's different degrees of sin, and whether you're doing it on purpose or not, and all of these things are considered by the judge in the cosmic courtroom of God. And the devil has always been allowed, ever since Adam and Eve, he's allowed to accuse all of us when we sin. And sin, another definition of sin, is doing something that God hates. And just like the real law in the United States or anywhere else, for anybody who's actually still using the law, it doesn't matter if you're ignorant of the law, you still are under the law with that. And so I believe that the devil was just taking a lot of little things I was doing, because I wasn't doing really maybe big enough sins to make him happy. He wanted to convict me real good, and he wanted to deceive me real good, and so the best way for him to do that, I think, was to kind of lay off me a lot, and he just kept collecting sins that he could use for accusing me, and also that he could use as open doors to influence me, or even possess my thoughts at times. And that's all I can say about. I do not know why. Otherwise, that's my only guess, because I did not only experience sleep paralysis in that one apartment. That year, I also had, roughly that year after I had lived there, I traveled hitchhiking with a friend, somebody I did, an acquaintance, another female. We hitchhiked from Texas to California, up the California coast, all the way up to Portland, Oregon, and then down, and then through Idaho, and I think Colorado, I'm not sure. Well, Idaho, and anyway, back down to College Station, Texas. And that was a scary experience. But one of the things is that I experienced sleep paralysis in several locations during that trip in different states. One time it was when somebody had let us sleep in it was a garage. It was not a house garage. It was a garage like where what do you call it? Those car repair places. And they have that big thing. It's like a big garage. And the last guy who had given us a ride, I think it might have been into El Paso, but I'm not sure. At that time, he let us. We had sleeping bags, and he let us sleep in the garage where he worked. And I had sleep paralysis there. And I had it in Colorado Springs, and okay, now I'm probably getting a little too far into the future again, because I need to go back a little bit again. It's the boys. I don't like talking about some things, and it makes it hard for me to tell it. So I realized that I just didn't want to talk about it, but I need to talk about it, so I'm going to say it. So then, uh, I, after we'd moved to Denver, and when I got bussed in as a white kid into a school called East High School in Denver, Colorado, it was basically just east of downtown in Denver. And I had to take long bus rides to get there every morning, but it was worth it to me to not go to the super conservative school that was all white, which I got, what do you call it, when they don't let you come back to school for a few times. It wasn't kicked out of school, but it was that, I think it starts with an E, I can't remember the word, but I wasn't allowed to come to school for a few days as punishment because I had crossed the school during lunchtime. Right across the street was a beautiful park, and I just wanted to go sit in the park. But that was, they had their little guards there watching people, and they saw me do that, and I got caught. And the other thing was, that same school, you were not allowed to wear skirts more than something like 2 inches below your knee. You could not wear a long skirt. And you had to wear skirts. It had to be dresses or skirts. If you're a female, you could not wear pants. You could not wear long pants. And that made me very angry because it snows there and it's cold there. And to some people, Denver doesn't seem all that cold, but I'm one of those people who gets cold easy. And I wasn't allowed to properly cover my legs. And that was the final straw for me. That's why I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. And so anyway, ended up going to East High School, where they had some racial problems, but I just tried to ignore them. That was my basic way I tried to deal with problems, is just try to shine them on and ignore them as much as I could. And I met a girl in my art class. I was real into Buddhism at that time. I was just into a Buddhism, not necessarily the Tibetan Buddhism anymore, but whatever I was reading about Buddhism. And I remember I was trying to embrace the fact that I didn't have friends and didn't talk to people much. That seemed like a really good Buddhist thing to do, to just not talk much. But this girl that was sitting next to me, she was a real talker, and I didn't want to talk very much, and she kept wanting to talk, and I didn't know how to deal with it, and I didn't want to be rude. And so finally one day, on a little piece of paper, I just wrote down a quote from some Buddhist book I'd been reading, and it said, "Talkativeness is the sign of an empty mind." And I wrote that down, and then I handed it to her. And after that, it was like she was hooked. She had to know me. It was the funniest thing. And then I finally gave in. It's like, okay, and I would talk to her. And she became my friend. And she would tell me about people that she was kind of obsessing over for whatever reasons. And there was this one guy named Michael, and I guess maybe he was a genius. He considered himself a genius. He and his best friend claimed that they had gotten into the school files and found out that they were both geniuses. And I didn't really care whether somebody was a genius or not, but it did make me feel a bit intimidated. And he had a very unusual look to me, he looked like he came straight out of the ages when they had Mozart and Bach and Beethoven. I don't know how else to explain it. He was Italian, and but he was unusual, and he wore, bell-bottom jeans, and he did drugs, and I don't know how he got interested in me, but he did, and I visited his home one time that I remember. I don't know how often I don't think I visited his home that many times, but it was when nobody else was home and we were down in the basement in his bedroom talking, and his mother came home, and she immediately decided that I was a slut because I was down there in his bedroom. Of course, at the time, one thing I didn't know was he already had a child. So she knew he was sexually active, and I was not sexually active. But I do remember at one of those visits, he made me to feel, he had this whole little, it was beyond just having a line, the way he did it, and he made me feel like he needed me. And for me, that was like falling in love, to be that he would need me. Oh, he needs me. And it brought out sort of my maternal instincts, to tell you the truth. It wasn't sexual for me at that point. And then he told me that he wanted to sleep with me, or, and he wondered what I thought about that. And I said, well, I've never really thought about that before. So I didn't even answer him. I don't think I even answered him right away, because it was just something I never thought about. When you're not even having boyfriends and stuff, why would you be thinking about having sex with them? And, but I ended up saying yes. That would okay, because I felt like he was the one. I was still thinking there's the one. You find the one, and maybe he's the one. I think he's the one, and he seems to need me, and that's a really good sign. That's what I thought. But his mother hated me. That was not a very good sign. And anyway, I did get deeply infatuated with him. Very deeply. And then one day at school, he calls me to the side, he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I just feel really bad, because he said, I have 2 other girlfriends and I feel trapped. And I thought to myself, well, if you really love somebody, you don't want them to feel trapped, and so I should just not, I should let him go. And I told him, I said, well, don't consider me part of the trap anymore. I won't be your girlfriend. And I didn't know that would only make him more interested. So later he comes back to me again, how he needs me so much, and da-da-da. And I end up going on a trip to California with him and his best friend and my friend from the art class that likes to talk. He was very abusive toward her. It was terrible, and I should not have overlooked that while it was happening. It was really wrong of me to let him treat her the way he did, and I never said anything to make him stop. And we went with my parents' permission, and her parents gave her permission, and we went in his pickup truck down to New Mexico, where we picked up his best friend's paramour, who had lived in Los Alamos. We picked her up. She was a very Madonna looking lady. Very interesting, very nice. I liked her. And then we drove through New Mexico and Arizona and got over to San Diego. And then we were just driving up the coast. Oh, well, we didn't keep going. San Diego is where one of the girlfriends he had felt trapped in, her family had just moved away from Denver to San Diego. And unbeknownst to me, he was really looking forward to seeing her right after I had just lost my virginity at the Grand Canyon in the pickup truck. I didn't even know what was going on. I really didn't. I didn't. But it was so weird because I had a dream that after I fell asleep, after he fell asleep on top of me, and I fell asleep and I had a dream. And in the dream, he said to me, "I'm going to leave you." That was the whole dream. And sure enough, about 2 days later, we were in San Diego, and he said, you all wait in the truck, and I'm gonna go see if she's there." Her name was, what was her name? Margot. Margot was her name. And he went to the house, went inside, and he was gone a really long time, it seemed like. And then he and she came out the front door holding hands and started skipping up the street away from the truck. And then my heart started breaking, and we ended up staying at the pickup truck crew, who had now also picked up one hitchhiker from France named Francois. We were all got parked at some place on a beach that allowed people to park there to sleep. It was real cheap or something. And we were there in San Diego for about a week, and he would leave each morning and go spend the day with Margot and come back. And I was really hurt, and I didn't say much, but I think he saw me crying or whatever, and he beat me up. I mean, what I call beat up. I know people have been beat up really bad, and he didn't beat me up hard enough for me to go to a hospital. But for me, physical violence is not something I was used to in my life, and I've always hated violence. And so that was extremely upsetting. It was kind of reminds me of having the wine bottle thrown at me in second grade by the older brother of Steve. You know, it was like, well, if you don't like him, you just do something mean to him or hit him or throw a wine bottle at him to get rid of him, kind of a feeling. And it doesn't do much for a sense of your self-worth, that's for sure. And my feeling at the time was I was probably praying to God. I didn't have a very strong idea of who God was, but I remember crying for hours and vowing to somebody, I don't know who. I think it was God, but I don't really know. And I was saying, I will just keep loving him. I don't care how much he hurts me. I love him so much. I love him forever. And I just wouldn't let go of that. I wouldn't let go of loving him. And so that all the things he did that hurt me continued, and I won't need to go into detail, just say there were more women after that, and then finally when we got back to Denver, I was still, although in great pain, I was still loving him. And he didn't want me to love him anymore, I think, and I think I said to him something like, "I love you," and he said to me, "There is nothing about you to love." And that pretty well ended our relationship, but it didn't end my pain. And that was why I got so suicidal. That was a lot of why I got so suicidal in my teens, because I had mentioned I was suicidal for, I think, a few years, and it was a lot because it was that. I thought he was my hope. I thought he was going to be the reason for living. I had made an idol of him, as I learned that I did with many men, or with several men after that. And it's not a good idea. You don't, in marriage, and having that person be the only member of the opposite sex you're going to be involved with intimately, that's correct, and it's good, and we were created to be that way. But I didn't understand any of that at all. And I just kept thinking if I just met the right guy, it would work out. And I had exactly zero morals about sex, about whether you should have sex or not. My morals were only do it if you want to. That's as far as it went. And I had many sexual partners, many that were just turned out to be one night stands. Most of them I had a hope it was going to work out, and most of them it was pretty obvious pretty quickly that it wasn't. And I had no conception of how girls like me were seen by boys or men. I didn't think of myself as being a loose woman. I thought I was being normal. Speaking of the word normal, this brings me back to an earlier time when I was talking about going to Arapahoe High School. And I had discovered already in earlier years that because I was always changing schools, I went to 10 or 12 different schools in my life without even finishing high school. That's how much we moved. So I had to have a way. I had a way to make friends. It was important. Other people have always been important to me. And I discovered that I wasn't too scared to make friends with other people who obviously felt like they were outcasts and were outcasts from the mainstream of the student body. And I would be able to pick out those people pretty easily, and they would be my friends. I would be friends. And the two main friends I had in Arapahoe was interesting because one of them, she seemed real nice. She kind of the way she looked reminded me a little bit of Cher, of Sonny and Cher. She had that kind of a look. And I think she was a little bit older than us. I don't really know for sure, but she was definitely taller, as if she were older than us. And at first I just thought she seemed real nice. I mean, she was always nice to me, but she invited me. I remember the first time she invited me to her house. I went to her house, and then her mother came home, and her mother was asking her questions, and she was lying. All her answers to her mother were lies. And then as time went on, I discovered she was an extremely compulsive liar. It was like she didn't seem to be capable of telling the truth. And there's some more stories I could tell about her, but we ended up not being in touch much after. There was one time that I invited her. She was invited to my birthday party, and she made up this whole story about how some Hells Angels came from out of town and she couldn't make it to my party. She was going into all these details. I said, never mind. Don't lie to me. Just don't. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear it, because I knew at that point how much she lied. And my other friend was, she had a father that was very well to do. He made good money. He had recently gotten remarried, and she had a sister. And they lived in an area especially for wealthy homes. It was a special, I don't remember, I guess you'd call it a gated community. And, but they lived in big houses and stuff and had pools and all that. And I spent the night with her many times, and we'd talk about things, and I was always teaching her about reincarnation. I was still into all that. And I think she was believing me, poor thing. And then she started having strange experiences. Like, well, she'd come over to visit me, and she'd be talking, and she'd be like, as if she was, with her hands, she was typing on a keyboard. And she said, well, Michelle, I just, ever since something happened to me recently, I just keep, it's like I can't stop being like I'm typing on a keyboard. I didn't know what that was. But then she told me what happened. Her dad had tried to kill her. He had purposely tried to run her over in their driveway. She managed to get out just in time, but it was so clear to her that he was trying to kill her. And can you imagine living with somebody? And I'm sure maybe somebody listening to this is living with a parent like that. And if you are, all I can say is please find yourself a safe place to go. You don't need to stay there. Oh. And I don't recommend CPS unless you know for a fact that it's a safe CPS where you live, because there's been a lot of bad things happening through that organization. Anyhow, this is such a long video already, and so I'm gonna find a place to stop here. I'm gonna say that, okay, it took me several years to get over Michael, and then I had that other guy that I had met in College Station that was the singer of the band, and I had an experience with him where I could tell that he was coming from a place of evil. It was very upsetting to me, but I had to cut him off at that point. I was still attracted to him, and sometimes I'd still be like wanting to be with him, but I heard him threatening other men if they would even speak to me. And to me, that's very evil. It was, I won't go into detail on that. And another thing that happened was I was at an LSD camp out with a bunch of friends, with Frank and with the lady that used to be called Doris. We were almost everybody there took acid, took LSD, and it was a super strong amount, at least the amount I took and the amount that Doris took. And I really almost lost it. I really felt like my spirit was going to be pulled out of my body and was never going to come back. I just spent the entire trip trying to hold myself together, trying to keep myself from being pulled out into some kind of outer darkness. It was terrible. And then at the time, my best friend was Doris, and she seemed to totally flip out. And she had handed me a matchbook because she was going to go pee behind the bushes. And when she came back and I tried to give her the matchbook back, she was afraid of me. She went, ooh, and ran away from me. She wouldn't take the matchbook from me. And she didn't speak to me anymore during those weeks that I was in town. And she would just always be just going, ooh. She was just kind of doing stuff she never did before, and she wasn't talking much. And that was all very upsetting. You'd think that I would never take LSD again after that experience, but I was stupid enough I did. And anyway, that's the end of it for now. I hope I'm not taking too long, but I pray that there's at least one person that will listen to this and it will help you to learn about Jesus, that Jesus is the only way. He really is the only way. It's not, in heaven is not, I mean, where God resides right now, this God and Jesus, they have a residence up in the third heaven, which is spirit. It's a spirit heaven. But the plan, and it's very clear in the Bible, is that there's going to be a big climax, and probably not too long from now, because we're in the end times, and Jesus is going to return, and all those who have come to him and repented of their sins, turned away from their sins, or do their best to turn away from their sins and turn to him and obey him. That's how you show Jesus that you love him, is by obeying him and doing his will, which is God's will, because he is one with Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God is one with three aspects. It's not easy for us to understand, but humans like us, we are not capable of understanding God, and we have to just accept that. We are very honored to be born in his image, but if we want to be able to live in him and have heaven in us, and then eventually, once this end times is over, be able to live on a recreated, purified, clean earth where death and evil no longer exist, we need to turn to Jesus. He is the only way. And let me just go ahead and end for now. And again, I know I'm hard to find on YouTube, and I recommend that if you want to be able to find me again, or if you're not subscribed, I think subscribing will help you find me on YouTube. But if you don't want to subscribe, or subscribing doesn't work, then just keep a link to one of my videos if you can. And that way you can get back to my channel and see whatever I have new. And I will plow through. I'm going to keep putting all these videos out, even if almost no one sees them. It's the best I can do, and I think it's what I'm supposed to do, so I'm going to do it. And I hope you all have a blessed day. Thanks for listening. Bye.